Hey folks, Chris Vandeviver here from WLPR and I want to welcome you to lesson 1 of my mini course on how to get the most out of EQ. I believe that this course will be valuable to anybody, regardless of your expertise. Whether you're a beginner who's just starting to learn how to use EQ, when to use it, why we use it, or if you're a more advanced user and you're just looking for tricks, tips, techniques for getting the most out of EQ. EQ is the crux of which mixing is built upon. I mean, if you think about it, we deal in sound, which is made up of frequencies and tones. From the beginning of a recording or a mix to the very end, that's all you're dealing in. And that's why EQ is the most widely used processor in a mix. We use EQ to emphasize or de-emphasize certain things about a track. We use it to carve out space, to find clarity, to glue things together. Let's open the channel EQ here in Logic. And real quick, just a quick dissection. The channel EQ shows us the frequency spectrum from 20 Hz to 20K. That is the low to the high. And it has 8 filters to play with. We have a high pass filter that cuts out anything that is below a certain frequency, a low pass filter that cuts out anything above a certain frequency. We have a low shelf or a high shelf, which allows us to boost or to cut generally the lower or the top end. And then we have 4 parametric bands that we can boost or cut independent of the lower or top end. And we can narrow or widen those filters. I think of EQ like Play-Doh. If you're not familiar with Play-Doh, it's a toy that is like putty. You're able to bend and stretch it and mold it any which way you want. And that's what EQ is. It allows us to bend and stretch frequencies to our will. So the first question that people often ask is, when should I use EQ? And my answer to you is all the time. Like 99.9% of the time, your tracks are going to have EQ on them, all of them. Now, that might fly in the face of what people say on the internet and forums, which is often like, if you get a great performance with a great instrument, great tone, with a great mic, then you shouldn't need EQ. And, yeah, that's the ideal, but that is very rarely the case. I mean, look up any pro studio online and look at images of that studio. You're going to see EQs. I mean, I get Sound on Sound magazine every month, and they dissect pro contemporary mixes, and they have EQ all over the place. The studio that I interned at in New York City, they had spent tons of money acoustically treating their live rooms, their mix rooms, buying monitors, converters, microphones, cables. If they're spending all that money on that stuff, then why were they investing money in a console with Neve preamps and EQs? Maybe because they're planning on using EQ all the time. And if they're using EQ with all that money invested, you're definitely going to be using EQ all the time. And I don't say that to be condescending. It's just if you're in your basement or your room or your office, you haven't invested all that money into the space, then you're going to need EQ. So the next question is, okay, I'm going to need EQ all the time. Well, where the heck do I start using EQ? Like, where do I begin using it and when do I use it? Okay, that's a fair question. But the first thing I would suggest before you even get started with EQ is, number 1, you got to start with a static mix, which means that you're going to listen to the busiest part of your song, usually the chorus, and you're going to adjust the faders and the panning and try to get the best balance you can with just those 2 things. A static mix allows you to get familiar with the track that you're working on. You're trying to get the best mix you can. And though some things are going to sound not as good and you're going to have certain instruments masking other instruments, it's just a good practice to get into, which allows us to get set up for the technique that I'm going to show you today, which is using the match EQ in Logic. So my goal is to create a goalpost for me to work towards when I'm mixing, right? So we do that with references. And references are basically pro mixes that are similar in style and are something you're aspiring towards. And you compare your mix against that pro mix. Now, people often shy away from referencing. And I get it. I empathize with it. I mean, usually someone would start with mixing their track, EQing, compressing, doing everything, just kind of based on intuition and their thoughts and feelings on the subject. And then like 80% of the way through the mix, then they start comparing their mix against the pros. And you're always setting yourself up for failure at that point because you haven't been comparing throughout the mix process. So, without a doubt, you're going to become demoralized because your mix isn't going to sound as good as the pro mix. It's just not going to because you haven't been following a goal. So then you get demoralized and you say, I'm not going to reference anymore. And then your mixes never get better. So I start referencing from the very beginning because why should I become demoralized at the very beginning? I haven't started doing anything yet. I got a static mix and that's it. So I know that this mix at the front end is not going to sound as good. But I don't want to just listen and kind of guess what the differences are. I want to analyze and have scientific evidence of what the differences are. So I've got a mix here. And like I said, I've already gone through and I've adjusted the faders and the panning as I saw fit. And I got the best balance that I thought I could get. Let's take a listen. Okay, sounds pretty good. Clearly it hasn't been mixed yet. Certain instruments are masking other instruments. The vocals don't sound as pristine as we want them to, but that's okay. I did the best I could. Now we're going to use the Match EQ to scientifically dissect how my mix is different from some pro mixes that I dig on. So I'm going to open the Match EQ here, and this thing is amazing. I can't think of a single other DAW that gives you this level of dissecting and analyzing for free. The Match EQ essentially will listen to a signal, then it will compare it against a different signal, and then try to match the first signal's EQ curve to the second signal. So for example, say you have a kick drum, you can have it analyze that kick, and then you can analyze a bass guitar, and then Match EQ, once you press match, will try to match the frequency curve of the kick drum to the bass guitar. In that particular case, you might not have a need to do that, but it's amazing for comparing your mix against reference mixes. So I have 3 references that I've loaded up over here. And in the Finder here, I've already bounced a version of this mix to compare against. So I'm going to just drag this right into the current tab of this Match EQ. And it's going to analyze. And now it spits out an EQ curve for us to take a look at. Now I'm going to open the mixer and I'm going to copy and paste this Match EQ to each one of these reference mixes. Not because I want to change the reference mix, but I want to be able to keep track of which one is which. I'm going to bypass each one too because I don't want them impacting the tonality of these references. I'm going to open the Finder. And I'm going to load up my first reference, which is Leave a Trace by Churches. I'm going to drag this right into the reference tab. No, it didn't seem to want to drag. Let's do that again. Okay, so you can see here's my mix. Here's the reference mix. And now let's match it. Now, before we even start dissecting this curve, let's do the same thing with the second reference. So bring in the second reference, drag it into Learn. Match, and then the third one, same thing. Drag it in, and match. Okay, so now the goal is to compare and contrast 3 different references. You don't want to just look at one reference because, by default, your mix will always be different from a reference mix forever and ever and ever because, it's different performers, different instruments, different days that the stuff was recorded or written, different parts of the world. Just everything is different about it. But when you have 3 or more references to compare the curves and the differences, really the similarities, now we can start to hypothesize and guess where the mix balance or imbalances are in our mix. So taking a look at these 3 curves, I'm going to make some guesses. First of all, you can immediately see that this curve and this curve takes a pretty serious dip around 50 hertz. Not so much in this curve, but there is a little bit of a dip. We can see that this curve has a substantial boost between 20 and like 50 hertz. A little bit of a boost, a little bit of a boost, okay? Now we can see that this is cutting considerably in the mids. This has a little bit of cutting going on in the mids. Not so much. And then the top end here and here is dramatically boosted. And though there's a cut above 20K, there is some boosting going on in the top end. So what I'm going to guess here is that maybe the low end is a little woofy and needs some reduction. Maybe it's just simply just bringing the kick or the bass down in volume. The subs might stand a little bit of boosting. The mids might need some cutting, which I've generally found to be the case. And then the top end needs some serious boosting across the mix. I mean, let's just take a listen to my mix against these reference mixes, right? Okay, the next one. Okay, and the third one. Okay, I mean, you can hear it. The first and the third references are brighter. They have less mid content, a little subbier. The middle one is a little closer to my mix, but still it's brighter. And so now we've made some guesses and we've dissected visually what's going on in the differences between my mix and the pros. So now I can move forward with a goalpost. Okay, maybe reduce some of the woofiness in the low end, definitely make the mix brighter across the spectrum, and maybe cutting some of the mids. So in the next lesson, I'll show you an easy way to immediately start trimming and creating clarity in your mixes.